What's going on, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Optimal AF with your host here, Nathan Barna. Today, I want to get into the topic, the theme of the hardest part about waking up. Now, this is something that I feel I've been in the process of for quite some time now, and it's just kind of been a slow and steady yet accelerating progression that I have been doing my best to be a witness of over really this past decade of my life. And just to give you a little bit of a backstory, when I was about 16, I really started to find myself in athletics and weightlifting, especially, and just being in the gym. I didn't really practice Olympic weightlifting at that time, but just being in the gym and pushing my body in that way, it was something that I really gravitated towards, something I was really called to, and ultimately something that initiated a very deep transformation in me. And that wasn't the only thing. It was one thing, but I believe, looking back now, that it was a very big factor that led to a lot of the other things down the road. Because through that avenue, through being in the gym, through lifting, I ultimately found myself wanting to be better and better. And through that, I found myself looking at a lot of these other elements that had to do with performing at a high level in the gym and just with my body. And so then I started looking at my diet. I started looking at my sleep, the quantity and the quality that I was getting. I started looking at how was I managing my mind and my emotions, and how those contributed to any additional stress that I was facing in my life. And then I even started to meditate, because I realized at that time that, okay, if I can have a little better management of what's going on in my mind and my emotions and in my body, then I could have a better handle of the stress that I create for myself through the way in which I think about things, and through the way in which I interpret things and give meaning to things. And so, having that background, as I got a little older, and I think it was around like 17 actually, a lot happened in a relatively short period of time. I moved to a new city, new school, didn't know anybody, and ultimately I got super depressed because everything that I had previously identified myself with was stripped away. And that was one of the first experiences in my life where, even though it might not have been a conscious thing, I was put in a situation where I had to let go. I had to let go of how I thought things were supposed to be, and create space to allow what was naturally arising within me, and then without in my external environment. And through that process, even though it was one of the most painful times in my life, it initiated this awakening process, because I started to ask different questions. I started to ask deeper questions. I started to really become more introspective, and to want to figure out, had a hunger for figuring out, what was really going on here. Why was I so affected by a situation like this? Was there a possibility that I was creating all of this and that this was all exactly how it was supposed to be? And is there a possibility that by becoming aware of that I can actually have more control or more of an influence of my destiny? And I started reading a lot. I started studying Osho and Ralph Waldo Emerson. Those are the two names that really stand out during that period of my life. And really, what those two combined gave me was permission to be myself and permission to allow what was happening to happen within me and to not be afraid of it or to not try and repress it or run away from it or try to hide from it and fit back into the kind of status quo, the consensus norm that I was finding myself to be a part of, even though there was a large part of me that was in rejection of that. Because everywhere I looked, everywhere I went, I had this feeling that I didn't belong. I didn't fit in. And so in this way, it was hard for me to make friends. And through those resources, through those teachers, they gave me a framework that I was able to go on this self-initiation process and really start to move into what I was experiencing instead of pulling away from it. And then that led me to start to ask the questions of, who am I? What am I really here for? What do I really want in my life? Not what I think I should want, but what do I really want? If I had no restrictions on resources, on time, on the opinions of other people and what I think people were going to think about me, and money, and I could literally live the life that I wanted to live, what would that look like? And for me, that was, I want to be in the gym. I want to be training. I want to be a full-time athlete. That's the one thing I had at that time in my life that really made sense to me. And that really gave me a deep sense of fulfillment and meaning. I felt at peace. I felt at atonement when I was in the gym. And so I knew that whatever I was doing, that had to be a part of my life. And so as I moved into that, opportunities started to present themselves. And again, now, looking back on it, and our memories, I find, aren't always the most reliable thing, because usually they're biased by our current interpretations of things. But either way, looking back on it, I see how a lot of things began to unfold for me once I gave myself that permission to be myself. I found this gym out in, some corner of the city that hardly anybody went to, but that just so happened to have the strongman equipment that I was looking for, because I was following Elliot Hulse at the time, and he inspired me to get into strongman and start competing in strongman. So I was looking for a gym that was going to have equipment for me to be able to do that. And through that, I actually met some other person that told me about this other gym that was a little bit more established and put together. And in that gym, it was Force Barbell, I met Tyler Miller. And he was really my first true coach and and life mentor, and helped me through a lot of rowing, and helped me learn a lot that I still practice to this day. And then, I don't have to go through the whole sequence of events, but I found myself, again, I didn't realize this at the time, but I can kind of see it now, hindsight. I realized how these things were unfolding, and that when I gave myself that permission is when these opportunities started to present themselves. Kind of like the saying that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And ultimately, I kept finding myself in this simultaneous place of opportunity presenting itself, but each of these opportunities required me to let go of even more of how I thought things were supposed to be and who I think I was supposed to be. Because each of these opportunities pushed me, because they put me in a situation where I had to do something that was going to be very uncomfortable and even painful in order to actually take advantage of that opportunity. And so another one of those opportunities was, dropping out of school. That was a very hard decision for me, because I knew that a lot of people were going to, think a certain way about that decision. But I just knew that I had to follow my heart, because that was the only reliable resource that I could find that was helping me grow, even though it might have led me to difficult and painful situations and decisions that I had to make. Every time I followed it, I ended up in a better place on all planes, on all levels. And so I knew it was a responsibility for me to follow that, even if it seemed like the hardest thing that I had to do up to that point. And so, yeah, like I said, one of those decisions was choosing to drop out of college. And I ended up actually, I started walking from Purdue to Bloomington to IU. And that was about like a walking wise, it was like a 14-hour walk. And it was like late November and things were starting to get cold. And I realized, I started walking, and I think I got to downtown Lafayette. I was like an hour into my walk, and I was like, fuck, I'm only at downtown Lafayette. And I decided to, I had like, I think $60 left on my credit card, because I had no source of income at the time. I was in college. I was a student, and I was literally living off of credit cards to feed myself. And so I was trying to save that money to buy some food. But I knew that, this walk was going to not be the most feasible thing and the most practical way to really get me to where I was trying to go. And so I decided to use the last little credit on my credit card to buy a bus ticket to go to Bloomington. And again, like this, I met people at Bloomington, and I was going to Bloomington anyways because I had a competition there, my first Olympic weightlifting competition. Because during this time I was still, I was training full time, and I was training so much that I was skipping class just so I could be in the gym and focus on my training. And which was one of the other reasons why I was like, fuck this school thing. I'm really not learning anything. I'm just, I was good at school. I know how to, remember and then regurgitate information, but I was already pretty set on what I wanted, and I knew what I wanted. And what I was learning in school wasn't helping me to get there. So that's why I said, this is stupid. I'm wasting my time. And then ultimately, through that whole progression, there was another, when I ended up going back, staying with my parents for a while and being an intern and ultimately a coach at Force Barbell with Tyler Miller that I previously mentioned. And after a while, I had that same sense again, because it was this feeling that, I'm not, I've gotten to a certain place, but this isn't it. And there's something more that I need to pursue. And so even with Force Barbell, there came a point where I knew that it was about time for me to move on. But me, just naturally, I can talk about my whole childhood about this, but just naturally not being a very strong communicator at the time, my way of going about making these changes was usually at a more subconscious level, in the sense that I would usually subconsciously, I would create conflict that would ultimately lead to a point where I had to make a decision. And so there was conflict arising at Force Barbell, which ultimately led me to the place where I basically, I was having those conversations